Hello, everybody, and welcome to Today in Space. It's the start of December here at the end of 2024, and we've got a few things to talk about. We're in the middle of interviewing a whole bunch of people that we're going to have on the podcast soon, and it's just been so great this year and last year, and really since the start of the pandemic. We've really gone out and explored and met so many new people through the podcast. And it's been glorious, and I can't wait to introduce you to some new folks. We have so many episodes from this year. If you see a People of Science episode or a person's name in any of the episodes, that's probably a People of Science episode. It's a great way to get introduced to the people that are in this industry, that are in STEM. Some don't work directly in the space industry. We're going to be talking to more people who work in tech about what they're doing and preaching topics like AI. But as I look towards the end of the year for 2025, I'm very excited about what's to come. This week, I'd like to talk to you about one of the latest projects we've got in our 3D printing lab and with our new venture with the Part Detective. More on that in just a second. But also, we've got a really cool new rocket launch, a Maiden launch for Blue Origin, the new Glenn heavy lift rocket. We're going to talk about that, what we like from that, and then we're going to close out talking about the new pick for NASA Administrator, a little bit of history since we've been at this space game for a little over a decade, and I want to share a little bit of perspective on that and really what has stayed consistent and why we actually are in one of the luckiest times in space history, other than the beginning of the space industry, where we have all this progress happening, and it's been continuing regardless of the political leanings of the administration, which has been rare, very, very rare in American history, and I think it's going to be very good for us. But I will talk about the challenges that are up ahead and more about the latest pick of NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman. But thank you for joining us. Thank you, as always, for following along. If you don't already subscribe to the podcast, whether you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening, or on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell, stay up to date on our new notifications. We're releasing new episodes. Weekly, we're releasing clips. Weekly, we're really pushing out more and more content here. We thank you for joining us. We have a ton of astronomy pictures on our Instagram and TikTok and Twitter, so you can check us all out on those. Today in Space Pod on Instagram and X. Today in Space on TikTok for however long that still lasts. And you can also check us out on our Facebook page, Today in Space Podcast. And email us anytime if you've got an idea that you want to have us dive into here on the podcast. We're always open for it. That's todayinspacepodcast@gmail.com. But now, let's dive into this week's episode. Thanks for joining us. Okay, let's talk about Blue Origin's new Glenn rocket. Now, we talk a lot about SpaceX because they are constantly flying, and at this point, they're launching rockets almost every other day, and we would love to talk about other people as well. So to be able to talk about a big next step for Blue Origin is exciting. I really would love to see more and more content from Blue Origin, and I always ask for it, and I want to give flowers to Dave Limp. He's the Blue Origin chief executive, and they're showcasing this new rocket. They're showcasing the tests. We want to see the development of the rocket. I know there's a lot of benefit to a kind of cloak and dagger approach of, and it's completely historic in the space industry. Many large rocket companies do a lot of their development behind closed doors. A lot of engineering companies do all of their development behind closed doors. But there's something specifically American space industry-esque that is showing the development. And the early NASA days did that. We have footage from all the way back then. We thank people like Walter Cronkite that were talking about it at that time and building content and teaching people the complexity, finding the story behind the complexity of going to space. So I, as someone who is constantly storytelling about space, I want to see more from Blue Origin. We want to see their story. We want to see the people behind it. SpaceX does a really good job of it. And so I want to give huge kudos to Dave Limp for posting this. So the New Glenn rocket is their Falcon Heavy. And New Glenn is what is going to bring them to space and really send things out to space. Their New Shepard rocket is fantastic for Kármán line jumps to the edge of space, right? And they're sending humans. They're doing humans with that. And more importantly, they're doing that on Blue Origin engine technology, right? The BE4 engines. Now, the BE4 engines are also powering New Glenn. So, the first maiden launch of any rocket is really where you figure out how good was the theoretical engineering, because so many things can go wrong in a rocket launch. But Blue Origin this is part of their advantage by the entire architecture of their rocket technology being based off of the same engines. It allows them to get to the launch pad for a maiden launch of a heavy lift rocket with a ton of data on how those rockets perform, because a lot of the time that maiden launch is really the first time that you're getting real data and feedback and not a simulation on going to space, and that's where things go wrong. Now, SpaceX's Falcon 9 is built off that same concept, right? The Falcon Heavy is built with 3 Falcon 9s, the center core, and then the 2 side boosters, but it's all Falcon 9 technology. And so we have seen that be very successful before with SpaceX, and I know with the new direction of Blue Origin, and personally knowing, whether just from afar from following them on LinkedIn or online, but I know there's a lot of folks who have gone to Blue Origin recently. There's been a lot of new hires of a lot of really smart people. I've been able to speak with a few people over there as well, and just get to know them, and it seems like they have a lot of really good people. They just approach it in a totally different way, and there's a lot of things to be really excited about here. So the fairing for the New Glenn rocket is larger than what is the standard for fairings, which is a 5-meter fairing. And that is where the payload, the thing going to space, sits. And so the big limiting factor for sending things into space is the amount of size and weight lift capability you have for that rocket. And the payload, you might be able to get to the right mass, but if it doesn't physically fit, like James Webb Space Telescope needed to be folded like origami just to get to space. And, it's all about what fits inside that fairing. So having a 2-meter larger fairing, so having a 7-meter fairing, 23 feet in diameter, allows you to open up a whole bunch. New Glenn will launch from Launch Complex 36 and out of Florida. And we're really looking forward to that. We love seeing that blue methane flame out of those engines. And another thing that I'm really loving that seems to be just this whole dynamic of private versus public/government launch operations is we've seen SpaceX be a little bit more aggressive on being prepared before any kind of federal clearance for a launch, right? We saw that with Starship, where they ran into issues where the FAA process was a lot longer than what SpaceX could reproduce to get ready for the next launch. And so they would put the rocket on the pad and publicly say, hey, we're ready, which then put pressure on the FAA to get that clearance and to make sure basically that every step is being taken and there aren't any waste, right? It didn't have to take a long time. Now, I love that Blue Origin is doing the same thing. They're doing it in their own way, right? Dave Lim posting, they're ready, putting the rocket on the launch pad, showing it's there. These are good things. That is part of the balance that I think if we're going to get to space progress and advance to a next level, this kind of pushback and a little bit of friction on the process is going to be needed. If we're getting to this point where private space is going to be the main part of the vehicle of us getting to space, right? Between Blue Origin and Rocket Lab and SpaceX and ULA, there's a lot of different companies, and the rocket launches with reusable rockets will increase. And so the process needs to adapt to that and make it so that we're still being safe, right? So I think it's a good thing that there's this pushback, and I like to see that from Blue Origin. I think they need to get their launch cadence up, and with New Glenn, they've got a little bit of work to get to, their original 45-ton payload capacity. Right now they're at 25 metric tons, which is totally fine. First maiden launch, you're not going to push the hardware to its absolute limits. But the quickest way to get there and the most financially viable and the fastest progress technology-wise is to fly as much as possible and keep reusing those rockets, because you don't have to build a whole rocket. You save so much in development costs that can go towards solving the problems that do come up and then tuning everything. So as an engineer, this kind of stuff excites me. This is the good stuff, right? That gets you excited about the work that you're doing and the challenge that you're attempting. And as I'm 34 now, I'm going to be 35 soon, and having worked in engineering long enough now, it really does come down to, what excites you. And you should, if you can combine that with something that you get paid for, then that's like a beautiful combination. And I think for me, that's why I went to school for aerospace engineering. That's why I like space. I like a good challenge. And so what's Blue Origin has ahead of them is a huge challenge. And with Artemis program being looked at again, we can go to the whole history of it, but Artemis and the Space Launch System rocket, there's a very high likelihood that there becomes a new contract available to send Artemis to the moon. And if Blue Origin gets their New Glenn rocket ready, they could very well take that away from SpaceX. So very exciting times as far as rockets and engineering and technology in space, but we're excited for Blue Origin's launch. They could launch before the end of the year. That's what they're posturing for. That's why they're on the pad. That's why they're talking about the payload, the Blue Ring payload. It's all good. And so I hope that they are able to launch well before the end of the year, maybe even before the holidays. That way everyone can enjoy their holidays. But these people will continue to work through the holidays and throughout the rest of the year to get this to go. And we wish them luck, and we thank them for how hard they're working and how many hours and forming their entire life around this mission. We appreciate you. So good luck, Team Blue, and let's get this new heavy lift reusable rocket up in the air and into orbit. Next up, we've got an update from AG3D Labs. So for anyone that doesn't know, we have a 3D printing lab where I have been working with 3D printers pretty much since 2016. And since we built our first 3D printer, we bought a kit online, we put it together, and then I was working at a injection molding shop, learned from an old tool maker named Ed, and he was teaching me that, while he's working in the office, at home, he has injection molding presses going, and every time they open up and drop parts into the bucket below, it's money for him, right? He's got these jobs on the side, he's building that. That fascinated me. Being able to be your own manufacturing and get your own jobs has always been a thrill, and so that's what AG3D printing is. I bought my first printer, ran it, started making my own parts, and then realized I could make parts for other people. And so since then, we have been making parts for anyone that needs a 3D printing project. And there's a whole bunch, there's so many different reasons that you can use 3D printing for. We've helped our friends at Snapcaller bring their idea for their product into reality. We did the first prototypes and helped them figure out what the design and feel and look would be, and get confident that a product was ready for them to take the leap into starting a business. But then recently, we've been expanding out because I've worked for many years in the 3D printing industry, and I've had a ton of experience working with parts, and that's really where my passion is getting those parts solved for you, right? Everyone runs into issues. The thing I was getting paid for, was to troubleshoot problems with 3D printing. And so I am trying to focus on your parts. The reason that the why of you using a 3D printer is your part. And I specialize in that. I was an application engineer, and I worked specifically on helping people bring ideas into reality with 3D printing. And that's what we're doing with the Part Detective. The Part Detective is how you can use us to help you crack and solve your 3D printing mystery. We are all about that. Just like an old PI, like a Dick Tracy or Ace Ventura or Sherlock Holmes, it's about solving that and figuring that out. And so you can actually use our services anytime now. We have a schedule on our website, AG3D-printing.com. If you know what you need, if you just need to sit down and figure something out, go to the website, sign up for 30 minutes with us. We have times throughout the entire week. Our schedule is always up. You can sign up anytime. And if you're not ready to just jump right in and deep dive into why your 3D print failed or how you could make this part better quality, or there's a million different ways that you can use us. And you should check out our YouTube page that we're kicking back off. It's at AG3Dprinting on YouTube. You're going to see our design reviews. You're going to see the different projects we're working on. Like right now, we are working on the James Webb Space Telescope model, which has been one of the biggest challenging projects we've taken on this year, because at the start of the year, we upgraded our 3D printer to be multicolor. We can use up to 5 different materials or colors at any time, and I was spending my time learning how that works. There are printers, for those that know 3D printing, that are called Bamboo Lab printers, and these printers came out on the market recently, and they have done what you want to do with a product to make sure that the customer experience is high quality. They have tuned all of the materials that they use and that they have to print extremely well. They've built a lightweight, fast-moving system that extrudes consistently, so you're going to get more consistent parts on a regular basis. And if you stick with the materials that they offer, which is rare, very cost-effective and cheaper than what you would get just off of Amazon, which are already pretty cheap for plastic spools of material, right? So they've really created a great thing. But because I love pain and a challenge, I want to use my Prusa 3D printer, which is one of the first multicolor 3D printers of its kind, but it's a lot more of an engineering project than, say, the Bamboo Lab. The Bamboo Lab prints things beautifully right off the stop, where I have full control, but I've got to tune most of the things because I buy my own filament, and I just love tweaking things. So anyways, this project started off with the idea that I would be able to 3D print this James Webb Space Telescope model in 3 different colors, and I learned a lot. The nice way to say it is I learned a lot about how the multi-material system on the Prusa works. We went through a lot of trials and tribulations. I've rebuilt the extruder a few times. I've really learned the dynamics of the filament coming out of the extruder, going back up to the idler where it changes the filament, and then controlling all that so that it doesn't fail every single time. And so now I'm at the point where I want to start challenging some of my friends with Bamboo Lab printers and see if I'm able to get a better print than they are. But this James Webb Space Telescope has been amazing. We've fine-tuned the model itself to be better for multicolor 3D printing. We've tuned it for the process itself, right, for the nozzle filament setup, and the way it's oriented is even specifically done for 3D printing purposes. And not only are we going to be sharing more about that and having videos up about it, but we're also selling the model out of our Etsy store, AG3D-printing.com. This is definitely one that I'm very, very proud of, and it truly is something designed fully for 3D printing. Like if you took the model from NASA, which they have free models of most spacecraft, just a ton of free 3D models, even of like the surfaces of different planets from satellite data. It's really amazing what they have on there. But like, let's say if you took the Space Launch System model and you put it into your 3D printer slicer for preparing your job, it's not realistic. It's not made to be successful on 3D printing. It's like a legitimate one-to-one model. So it's going to be sheet metal, but scaled super small down, which is way smaller than like a single line of plastic that I can extrude. So it's really not helping you to make it. It's a great thing to have in like an AR environment, or maybe to teach a class, but not for 3D printing, where this model is designed specifically for 3D printing. And we're also going to be selling the 3D model as well. So if you want to 3D print it at home, or if you want it yourself, we will have that up. It'll be on our Etsy shop, but it should also be in our Replicator, which is our shop online if you're on social media. And you can hit it up anytime. We've got our 3D printed goods up there, and you can help support the podcast. And yeah, so this James Webb Space Telescope available now, but really, I want you guys to check out the video we're going to put out for the Part Detective, opening up the Part Detective case files, and we're going to talk about all the challenges that we went through and the things that we did to make this model work and for it to be as beautiful as it is. And then, if you have a multicolor 3D printer, you should get it, because you should see if you can beat us in the quality for this part, for this multicolor part. And it's a challenge. It's not easy, but I want to see what you can do. So more to come, but that's the latest from AG3D Labs. As always, you can check out our stuff, AG3D-printing.com, at AG3Dprinting on Instagram and TikTok, again, for however long that still is there. And our YouTube page is also very active now. So if you're looking to get some more 3D printing content and have some laughs too, because we love making funny content for 3D printing stuff. So check that out. And if you need a 3D printing problem solved, reach out to the Part Detective, AG3Dpartdetective@gmail.com. Get the conversation started. Emailing, you can always email us for free, start a conversation. We can see if we can help you. If it's beneficial to set up 30 minutes with us, you can go to our website at AG3D-printing.com, and you can book 30 minutes with us right now, $60, and you'd be surprised how much you're going to get in 30 minutes. Never mind free communication with email afterwards and before. So hit us up, AG3D-printing.com, and let's dive into our final topic, talking about the new NASA administrator. All right, now, NASA's new administrator picked by the Trump administration is Jared Isaacman. We're going to stick to a little bit of history here to give you context. We're going to try and stay as much away from the politics of it, but it's important because it is the function of NASA as a government agency. So Jared Isaacman as a pick has been, let's say, controversial against some folks in NASA, who I would say the most logical concern of that is that science research and non-commercial space endeavors will not get as much funding as, say, the commercial program, which Jared Isaacman has purchased multiple flights with SpaceX. He's doing his own string of missions, human missions, with Polaris Dawn. We're all aware of the Inspiration 4 mission that happened, and there's a Netflix documentary if you haven't seen that, which is tremendous, and I expect there to be another for Polaris Dawn. Really looking forward to that. But I think the major concern from folks is that Jared Isaacman will be focused more on private ventures than what is the full potential of NASA. Now, our opinion is that we live in this very lucky time in American space policy and progress, and specifically the space. I was going to school as an aerospace engineer when there was a drought, when we retired the space shuttle, and getting a job in the space industry was near impossible. The Obama administration, when things really started to turn around and things changed from what they had been in the past. That's the beginning. That's the nexus point for us. With George W. Bush, That administration tried to do the Constellation program, which was going to be going back to the moon, which is what the Artemis program is trying to do now, but setting up something bigger. And the Constellation program failed because it was too expensive without having that many launches. And so basically the program died, and it ended up not happening and wasting a lot of progress. Under the Obama administration, there was a big focus to replacing our own ability to send humans into space, right? We didn't have anything that could send our own astronauts from American soil anymore. We were relying solely on the Russians with their Soyuz. And as you can imagine, in the world we live in today in 2024, relying on Russia to send our own astronauts and to have our own human space program seems a bit ludicrous. But had that not happened back in 2010, that we would have been in that position without any leg to stand on. Hopefully we would have had SpaceX regardless, but it was the funding back then by the Obama administration in these commercial crew programs like SpaceX, like Boeing Starliner, like Sierra Nevada's space plane, and so many others, and so many different launch providers, right? Like, getting to space was almost not possible for the U.S. 14 years ago, right? We were in a very, very strange spot. Yes, we had the ULA. Yes, we had other rockets, but we're talking 4 or 5 flights a year, right? And if you think about how many times we're launching now, that seems a little bit ludicrous. But back to the Obama administration, what happened from afar, right? I am not in the day-to-day of the politics of it. I have read books about people who are in it and their time. I definitely suggest going to check those out. There are a few I can recommend. Go check them out in the comments, in the description for this week's episode. Do a little bit of research. But what happened in the Obama administration was that it set up this new investment in what would become new space and what we're seeing today. Why the space industry just all of a sudden is huge and booming is not a mistake. It was a focused effort to invest long term. After 8 years of the Obama administration, the Trump administration came in and actually continued most of the efforts, specifically the Commercial Crew Program, and pushed it forward. Trump also created the Space Force, which has now become a much larger entity, and all of the old Air Force bases that were launching rockets have now become Space Force bases. And so it was an even deeper investment in widening the investment in the American space program. So basically, instead of, which was basically tradition before the Obama administration, and that they actually continued going in, was that they did not take the previous administration's space program. They wanted to create their own, right? NASA had been used like a football being tossed around politically, and it had lost its way since the space shuttle was in its older years. They had extended the program for many, many different administrations, mainly because it was so expensive to get a new program up and running to replace it, and then also keep up with the reusability constraints of the space shuttle. The space shuttle is the first reusable spacecraft we ever had, but in the way that NASA was set up, it was just too expensive. And even from the original design, right? The way that they were getting these spacecraft recertified for reuse was expensive, both in money, resources, and time. And so it just didn't work, right? People had been disenfantasized from, I don't even think that's a word, but people were no longer talking about reusable spacecraft, and we were just stuck in this, well, if it's flown before, we keep it with that. We don't have the money to develop new technology. And as a young aerospace engineer, that was very frustrating. So for me, to get context on me, I was learning aerospace engineering in this world where they were saying, don't think about anything new, use the old technology, flight heritage only, while I was watching SpaceX and others develop new technology and streaming it online, right? Again, folks, this is 2008, 2009, 2010 to 2012, right? Like, those 4 years was a very interesting time if you were paying attention, but most people weren't. And we were very lucky that the Obama administration invested in space. It was a very difficult thing internally, from what I've gathered from reading. You can look at Lori Garver's book for more on that, and there are others. But under that administration, things started to flourish. The investment happened. It also happened at the NASA level, right? There were $6 billion that were invested over multiple years for the space launch system, which has still yet to send humans, right? Artemis 2 just got delayed again. That is where we will actually put humans on board and have them orbit the moon with the Orion spacecraft. The space launch system is actually not the thing holding things up at this point. It's the Orion spacecraft's heat shield, which, if you're following along, was not being allowed to be discussed in most space circles. And now, obviously, NASA made the right choice and said, it's not ready to fly. We need to figure out how to prevent huge chunks of heat shield from coming off. But it also means that SLS is very likely on the chopping block for the next administration that's coming in. And so, going back to my real point here and why I have some optimism with Jared Isaacman is not only an entrepreneur, right? If he was just an entrepreneur paying for a flight, it would be one thing. But he's also a test pilot, right? He flies jet planes. That is a classic NASA thing. That's aeronautics, right? That is something we want. He knows that industry. He actually is involved in air shows, flies his own plane, and as we saw with Kid Poteet, his other crew member and friend on the Polaris Dawn mission, right? They have this close tie with the aeronautics industry. That is great for things that are not just commercial space, right? That is a great connection, and he's already involved, so he knows a lot of the problems that are happening. And not only that, he's also an astronaut. He's been to space multiple times. Charlie Bolden, the NASA administrator during Obama, and the current NASA administrator and ex-senator Bill Nelson was also an astronaut, both on shuttle. And now we have another astronaut and pilot as NASA administrator with Jared Isaacman. Now, again, people are concerned about the private connections with him and SpaceX, but, I am less concerned about that. And it's also, man, I've been in this space game for too long. I think if anyone is worried about special relationships of the NASA administrator getting in the way of progress or influencing certain programs to be advanced, that is just coming from a place of dishonesty, because every NASA administrator that I've had in my time on has prioritized projects with their own relationships for the program. So it may not be the relationships that those people want, but it is something that has happened historically with every other administration. So this falls into the bucket of something politically that someone says is terrible, but usually they don't have a problem when it happens with their version of it. So that to me is more of a human problem that is not really looking at it from a higher view, right? From a place of non-bias. So I kind of toss that out as, you know what, I'm not so worried about that. But it will influence things, right? His influence as an entrepreneur, right? Shift 4, which is a payment processing technology. When I went to New York Comic Con, Shift 4 was the payment at the hotel I was at, the Arlo Midtown Hotel, right outside of the Javits Center. Great hotel. I had a great time. But it was just like, hey, look, that's Jared Isaacman's influence right in front of me. Now, Jared has stepped down from Shift 4 payments as he will be going into the role of NASA administrator. And he will also benefit from three different administrations, right? You've got the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, and now the Trump administration again. That's four different White Houses will be pro-space program and have people installed that will continue the progress that has happened from the previous one. That is unheard of in America's space history, and it's not a story that you're hearing a lot. I will definitely be paying attention to it. We love the balance here on this podcast, so we will definitely be talking about both sides of the issue as much as we can, and we need your help to keep us on the path for that, and more specifically to talk about things that you're worried about. So if you, in the future here, in whatever administration is going to be around, if you have things that you are concerned about, certain research that's not being funded, that needs a bigger voice, reach out to us. We're happy to research that and cover it here on the podcast. I think there's a lot of things to pay attention to that are coming up, but I look back at my own history, my own experience back when I went to my first NASA social back in, I believe it must have been 2015, 2016, but it was for the New Horizons mission, right? New Horizons hadn't made it to Pluto yet. We hadn't even gotten the first pictures, but it was on its way. It was very close. And this NASA social was to show and discuss all the science. I was able to meet Alan Stern, who was the principal investigator, and back then, New Horizons was one of the last planetary science, solar system science missions that we had a good cadence of, right? The discussion back then with the NASA administration, at these NASA socials, the things they were concerned about post Constellation being canceled, with the George W. Bush going into the Obama administration, as they were setting up their new thing, was if we don't start planning, we're already behind because it takes a while for spacecraft and missions to be developed. They were already behind back in the early teens of the 2000s, that there weren't enough solar system missions, and that we would reach a point where even if we started today, we would have this big gap of planetary science happening. And, we've been really lucky. Europa Clipper just launched. We've had multiple Mars missions, and luckily that did not happen. We haven't faced this huge lack of planetary science, but it did change, right? People believed it wouldn't happen, and it did change. We live in a world where planetary science and sending missions to other places in our solar system that have cameras on board are very valuable, both politically but also scientifically as well, and with the public, right? People want to see that stuff. So the planetary science program did a good job of defending itself against this back then. All I know is that things can change and get better, and if you keep the pressure on and keep a voice going for different programs of NASA that may be experiencing problems. The New Horizons mission got saved recently because it was going to be deprioritized and essentially not used for its original purpose, but the team was going to lose funding and purpose for the New Horizons mission. But Alan Stern took online, spread the word, other people defended it, and so that moved things politically so that the New Horizons mission could be saved. That is the action item for anyone who's looking to defend certain programs or make sure that certain NASA research does not go through. The good thing is that Jared Isaacman is approachable. He right now is online, and you can reach out to him, and I'm not saying he's going to follow up, but he's a very available person, even more so than Jim Bridenstine, who was the NASA administrator for the first Trump presidency. And he did a good job of continuing and playing nice, I shouldn't say playing nice. He played the political game and helped usher NASA through this very awkward transition, which usually meant the cancellation of programs. The space launch system continued forward. So now that we're on with Bill Nelson. We had a lot of the programs continue, right? Starship is still being developed and being looked at as an option. It was picked as the lander for Artemis, and Artemis 3 specifically, the first time we're going to step foot back on the moon, right? Starship won that contract under a Bill Nelson administration. So there has just been a blending, a purpling of the red-blue state of American space politics that is very good, and I think that's going to continue here. I think even if Jared Isaacman wanted to cut a lot of programs, it doesn't quite work like that. Politically, you can get stalled out if you don't get support. So working together is going to be something that is going to help space progress. And we've had now multiple NASA administrators that did, in their own capacities, work together in the purpling of the space industry, that mixing of both sides of the aisle. So I think it's going to be very interesting times. I think we will experience more progress. And I think, and I could be wrong, but we'll look at this in 4 years and see if we were right. But I do think we're going to see a great boom in human space science. And I think that is going to help bring other programs out, specifically space health, right? Astronauts themselves are expanding and widening as far as their scope, right? They're not just the NASA professional astronauts anymore. The private space industry, the space tourists, space flyers, as it's been called here as well. Those folks have a much wider health range than we've seen in the past. So, and with Jared Isaacman being at the forefront of new human spaceflight, private spaceflight, right, citizen spaceflight at a near NASA level, that is very exciting, and I expect a lot of NASA programs to continue to grow, and maybe even some new ones. But I am very optimistic. I would like to hear your thoughts. We're open. This is a science podcast. We're open to the debate of ideas. So please feel free to reach out to us and send. Let's all learn together. So send whatever you can, resource wise. Let's have a discussion, and we'll see what happens, folks. Because none of us can read the future, but we are living in the most space momentum of my lifetime, and I see Jared Isaacman as someone that's going to continue that momentum. So in that way, I am very excited. I know we are going to have plenty of things here to discuss and cover, and so I'm really looking forward to it. But we've gone on for too long. Those are our thoughts on the new NASA administrator, Jared Isaacman, and what it could mean for our space future for the next 4 years and beyond. I am Alex Girofanos, your space science podcast host from the East Coast. Thank you for joining us. Follow us online, Today in Space Pod, on Instagram and X/Twitter. Today in Space on TikTok, again, for however long that lasts. And then subscribe to the YouTube page. Like, follow, subscribe, hit that bell so you can get new notifications here in the future. And then always, you can email us at todayinspacepodcast@gmail.com. Folks, spread love, spread science. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.